Hello, Christopher Brent here, coming to you today with a musical podcast on music theory, and specifically, as piano students, do we need to study music theory? How is it beneficial? So I'm going to talk about that today. I am a piano teacher and music educator from Michigan here in the United States, and I love teaching theory. I love talking about theory, and I love exploring musical aspects related to theory because you can discover so much about music, and I think that's important. So the answer to the question is yes. I believe it is very important to study music theory, and I think you should study as much theory as you can as a piano student. So why is this so important? Well, let's go back to the beginning of studies, right? When you're maybe a young child studying piano, or maybe you're an adult just starting out or something. Whenever you're in that early phase of learning the piano, one of the first things that you're doing is learning the notes on the staff, and you're learning the notes in the spaces, spell the word face, you're learning F-A-C-E, you're learning where middle C is, you're learning the notes on the lines, and if you're from somewhere else in the world, if you're using do, re, mi, or the solfege system, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, you're learning it that way. But either way, it's going to be the same concept, of course, right? So you're learning notes individually. In some cases, students learn notes intervallically. Maybe they learn where middle C is, and then they learn that the next note above that is D, and the next one above that is E, and so forth. So either way, you're learning where each individual note is, so to speak. But after a while, you want to learn how notes relate to each other, so it becomes an easier process, and so it's not so overwhelming. So after a while, you'll discover that C, E, and G put together form a C chord, right? And after a while, you'll learn that C, D, E, F, and G form a C major 5-note scale, and so on. So when you start to see how all of the notes relate to each other, you'll see families. You'll see families of notes, and that's actually how things are in language. When we learn the English language, or whatever language you speak, people I know speak 4 or 5 languages, and they're very versed in different languages, and I think that's actually an amazing talent. That's something that I have always wanted to do, is become fluent in another language. But anyway, to do so, when we're looking at language and speaking and reading, for instance, you're taking letters, individual letters, and you're seeing how they are formed in words, and then eventually how they're formed in sentences, right? So when you're a little kid, you're learning your ABCs. Eventually, you're going to graduate into the next step and sound out words, right? And then you're going to see how the words relate to each other. You're not just going to see all individual letters when you read a book, right? You're going to get to a point where you see how words form sentences, and how sentences form paragraphs, and then how the paragraphs form a whole chapter, and then you see how the chapters form the whole story of the novel, right? So music is very similar. You're going to see how chords will become phrases, and then you'll see how the phrases will form entire sections. You'll see how all of these phrases will relate to one another to form the whole exposition of a sonata, right? And then things won't seem so overwhelming to you anymore, right? Because at first, if you just look at a work and see only individual notes, individual letters, and you don't see any relationship between melodies and harmonic structures and things like that, if there's no understanding of that, it's going to be harder. It's going to be much more difficult. So actually studying music theory will make things easier. As difficult as it may be to sit down and do the homework as far as analyzing goes when it comes to theory, it's actually going to come out in the end as something that will help you study music in a way that everything will be easier. So study your theory, know your scales, learn your scales. I'll talk about scales in another podcast and why those are so important, because some of that has to do with technique as well. But scales are important. Understanding how to form chords on each note of the scale degree is important. If you're playing jazz, especially, understanding 7th chords, 9th chords, and some of the extensions that you can add on to the chords, that's basically a must. You really have to know that if you're going to study jazz. So whether you're studying classical music, jazz, or pop or commercial music, all of these styles are going to employ elements of music theory in one way or another, and notes and chords are going to relate to each other. And that's the thing. When you study theory, you're analyzing the relationship between notes, right? And you're going to see things that you may never have thought of, right? When you are first studying, you just see individual notes, right? And you're going through this process that might seem overwhelming. But after you get through that process, there's a next stage, right? And you want to continue that stage, and that's where theory comes into play. When you're studying piano, you don't just want to learn everything by rote memorization and just leave it at that, because you're limiting yourself. Sometimes that does happen. Students go years and years and they learn by just rote memorization and they don't have an understanding of theory. So if you're a piano teacher out there, I would advise you to look into something like a student achievement test or something that's similar, where students can go to get tested on performance, theory, technique, and maybe oral awareness. There's several programs out there that offer that kind of thing at the local and state level. So I do student achievement test, the student achievement test program through the Michigan Music Teachers Association, which is related to the MTNA, which is the Music Teachers National Association. So all of my young students can go take the achievement test, where they're tested in performance, which includes memorization of works, as well as understanding theory, technique, oral awareness, and sight reading. And there's even a little bit of music history that's being tacked on to that as far as the new version of things goes here. So there's other versions of this through other associations throughout the world. So I would advise you to look into that. It creates an enhanced program for students, and they can understand these aspects of theory more in depth. So do that. You don't just want to limit yourself as a teacher and as a student. So get to know music theory. There's so much information online, and it's so much easier to get the information now. So take advantage of that. If you have questions, please email me at chrisbrentmusic@gmail.com. If you have questions about lessons via Skype, I would love to talk to you about the possibilities of lessons. So you can email me, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and visit my website at www.christopherbrent.com. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.